Okay, this is our first lecture, if you like, about the legal system in Australia and how it operates. Well, there's Australia. Now, as you know, Australia is made up of a number of people, and really that's the essence and the most important part of any democratic system is that the people actually control what happens, what goes on. Now, that flows into the legal system, so what you'll find is that you're unsure what's the most important part of government. You'll find it's ties right down to where a person's elected. A person who's elected and the majority of elected people will have the power to legislate, to do what they want to do. So we're talking just primarily about legislation at the moment, but we'll move into judge-made law and the operation of judges as well later on. So let's look at it from the parliamentary side, and we say that the first and most interesting bit, I think, is the difference between state and federal parliament. Now, for OH&S it has quite a large impact, but may not do by the end of this year, 2010. The reason is that we're trying to get a unified act now, that a unified approach to OH&S legislation across Australia, where either the states agree to hand over a power to the Commonwealth, or alternatively the states simply legislate identical or just about identical legislation in each of their jurisdictions. Jurisdiction is for instance, I'll give you an example of what the concept of a jurisdiction is. I have jurisdiction over my house, in theory. I can kind of do what I want with, my house, or at least inside it. However, my wife claims that she has jurisdiction over it as well, so we now have joint jurisdiction over it. And then we've recently got 2 Labrador puppies, and they consider that they have jurisdiction over it, so now we've got 4 jurisdiction problems, and 6 parrots, and also a possum, and about 20 ducks. Each one of them believes they have jurisdiction, so we have a large number of jurisdictional fights and disputes in this household, and I seem to end up something like a minor state independent member in an area that is populated only by feral geese. That's pretty much my position, I think. Okay, so, but in the federal parliament, let's have a look at what happens with federal. And what I mean by federal parliament, as you will see, he resides in Canberra, and under the Constitution, which is a very important part, just slip the Constitution in there. Under the Constitution from 1901, Constitution Act, which curiously enough is actually a piece of British legislation, but nevertheless governs what it is we do. Under the Constitution, that the federal government has certain powers and the state governments have certain powers. So if you look at the federal government, you'll find that at the present time the executive part of the federal government is the Labor Party under Prime Minister Rudd, and you'll also see that but he doesn't have the total control, because although he has a majority in the lower house, in the legislature, which is made up of both houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate, I should say. The legislature is another branch of, if you like, a part of the entire power system. So when all of the parliamentarians get together, they then vote to determine whether or not legislation should pass the House, and if it does pass the House, then it gets taken up to the Senate, and then it's got to go through the Senate, and there's all of these procedures that have to be gone through, and this is all determined by the Constitution. All of the procedures exist pretty much solely in the Constitution. I mean, there's orders and things that make parliaments operate in particular ways, but generally speaking, all those orders derive their power primarily from the Constitution. Now, so we've got two branches of two parts of government there: the executive, which is Parliament, the Prime Minister and Cabinet, and the legislature, which is all those assembled in Parliament who vote. And another branch of government, though, in a sense, another branch of law at least, is the judiciary. Now, it's always been thought that keeping these separate is very important, that there should be a reasonable separation of the executive, the judiciary and the legislature. In the US, the executive is actually the president. Legislature is the Parliament, and then the judiciary is, of course, the judges. And so it's more separate in the States than it is here. But the theory is that it's imperative to maintain these three separate, or these three institutions with reasonable separation, otherwise you end up with pretty bad corruption. So the idea is that each one runs a check on the other. And it actually works fairly well, considering they say it's a poor system, but it's the best of all poor systems, of all the systems we have. And so it does work. Now you've got to tie into that the fact that we've also got state parliaments all around Australia as well. And we take Queensland, for instance, we've got Anna Bligh, and the state government, and that, once again, what the state government can do is determined again by the Constitution Act. The people up there in the top vote in who the executive is going to be, and once again you've got the same thing, and you've got an entire set of judicial judicial things as well. An entire set of judicial courts which are there to enact the legislation, or at least to enforce the legislation. So